Hi, this is Dan Ziegler. I'm the CEO and founder of YCDB, a global brand consulting firm, tactical strategist, classic polymath, and I run a coaching business where I coach CEOs around the world as well. I'm honored to spend an hour with you today on our beautiful Valentine's Day edition, where we're going to talk about lots of things that I find interesting in the world and the passions that drive us. I'm honored to be spending some time with our host, Jonathan Bowman-Perks. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed. And Dan, it was lovely. It was Brian J. Esposito who appeared on the series, and he said, you're going to have Dan on. He's such a ball of fire, and you certainly are. I've really enjoyed our conversations. The one we had a few weeks ago is a warm up to this. And then just before we came on air, I find there's so much wisdom and experience you have, and a fun of life, a sense of making the most of it. So tell us a bit about some of the things you've been doing in the last couple of years. And then we'll go back to childhood, Dan.
Sure. So in the last couple of years, I have really honed the message of YCDB, what it means to me, what the philosophy is, and divided into two sections. The first is more of a personal statement. You can do better. And it's mirror facing. It's me looking in the mirror and saying each morning to myself, what am I going to do differently today to do better? Active listening, maintain a level of humility, be more heart-centered, get out of my own head. And how do I then impart that into the coaching that I do with CEOs and executives around the world? One of them in particular is a dynamic young CEO from an startup company called B Mobile, which is in the micro mobility business. And Brian and I have gotten together on a couple of these. That's how we met each other. And so it's really empowering for me to impart knowledge and wisdom to younger generations of individuals when they're receptive to it. And so the coaching side of my business, You Can Do Better, is about personal growth and development. And then there's brand strategy and tactical development on You Can Dream Bigger, another acronym for YCDB, where I work with companies and teams and brands on what their next vision is. We work on ideation and strategy and tactics moving forward. And that runs the gamut. As we'll talk in this conversation, I've spent many, many years in the performance marketing industry, media industry, recognizing hundreds of brands at my disposal. And with 400 trade shows under my belt, I've had a deep level of access to brands across industries. And so I pick and choose the ones that drive me the best and which ones I think I mesh with, and my particular brand of coaching and consulting. And I look for clients that are receptive to recognizing and understanding what I bring to the table.
Yeah, you're so right, because it is about a connection, trust. It's about co-creation, so you can bounce off each other. I know you talk about ideation, where there's lots of ideas, and you can really work together to build something more than the person would do on their own or with another advisor. And what about if we take you back to Dan as a child? You had quite a profoundly shaping childhood, but what was the influence of your parents and their background and where they came from, and grandparents? Tell us a bit about that, because I found that very interesting.
Thank you. It was interesting and boring for the first half of childhood up until about 16 years old. Living in Long Island, New York, upper middle class suburbia, pretty normal existence, except I had a mathematical genius of a father who worked really, really hard to provide for his family and was on the cutting edge of some technology in the UPC code or data industry way back when, back in the late 70s, early 80s. And so he spoke a different language, Fortran, COBOL, Pascal, all these different machine code languages. And so we would have small little conversations about what the future looks like. And so at a very early age, I had a dreamer and a futurist as a father who would constantly come back from his travels discussing what's coming next and what the world will look like. Everything from RFID technology and what these barcodes are going to do for the supermarket business. And then I had a wonderful mother who cared deeply for her three boys and gave us a loving home. And we shared experiences and had very open dialogue. And there was really no topic of conversation that was off the table. Lots of grandparents, lots of families, holiday dinners, half Jewish, half Sicilian, so lots of food, which we'll talk a little bit about in our conversation. And then the world created a cavernous hole in it and swallowed up my entire life. My father, unfortunately, away on a business trip at 44 years old. He was physically incapable of surviving his one and only heart attack and was gone in about a minute and a half, as the paramedics said. And so it was a massive, massive cardiac arrest. No defibrillators in 1985 in the office where he was working, and he was gone. And so first half 16 was one tumultuous experience after another as a standard child. You just struggle through life and you figure things out. And then everything else changes from 16 forward. And I knew you and I talked briefly about the loss of a father and what that really means to a young boy, and the impact and how it becomes part of our story or it becomes our story.
Yeah.
I chose to make it part of my story. And so lots of positive influences surrounded me. And I think it was those paternal and maternal individuals that surrounded our family that kept me from going to the dark side, and going off the house or so.
I'm really sorry that your father died at such an early age. I mean, I think you said he was 44. My own father was 33 when he died, when I was 2.5. And you don't really get over it, but you need to get over it, because otherwise it defines you. And I remember the naval officer who said to me, you can be a victim, poor me, or you can make your father your inspiration to do the work that you do, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing and you're doing what you're doing. But was I right in understanding that also you had a quite a problem around this time of a loss of mobility? Was I picking that up?
Yes. So at 14, I was an overactive husky, as they like to call us, youth. Had a few extra pounds on me from all that good eating. And I was involved in sports. I had a torn hip joint, not to get too medical or too specific, but I tore the growth line in my hip, and I was misdiagnosed at the local hospital because I felt the pain in my knees. And so they sent me home on crutches, and it turned out for 3 weeks, I continued to walk on this hip, almost to the point of, I passed out. They got me back to the hospital and said, let's x-ray his hips. The bottom line was I had done irreparable damage to my hip. And luckily for my father and his insurance companies and the good medical, history of Boston Pediatrics, flew down to New York, and they pinned my hip in place. And so I spent weeks in traction and weeks in the hospital, and then months at home in a wheelchair, living in the first floor of my house instead of back upstairs in my bedroom, and then months of physical therapy and rehabilitation, learning how to walk again. They basically cut my thigh open and put in, 6.5 inch, 4 screws and screwing my hip together. And I was told at that moment in time, there's a fairly high likelihood that I won't walk normally. I won't ever really run. Most sports are now off the table. And so an inflection point at 14, that wasn't really realized till much later on. It was woe is me. It was wallow in self-pity. It was a constant doldrum at 14 of, I can't believe I can't go to camp, and I can't play football, and I can't wrestle, and I can't ski. But again, it's a life lesson that I look back on today and recognize it happened for me, not to me.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry that what you went through, and I'm interested to hear about, was there a connection between that and then your father dying and the two overlapping? I can't remember anything from that early years of when my father died, whether that was my body's way of coping with things, but just memory completely blanked out. But I was listening to the book, the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And in it, they were talking about, some people talk about to me, things are done to me, the sort of the victim mentality. This is not fair. This was done to me. What I do, torn hip and my father dying and all this kind of stuff, or by me, that I can have more control over what goes on, or that things work through me. This is where, this stage of how you coach and advise and help people around the world. And it sounds much more now it's through me, but maybe at that time it was to me. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Oh, you're right. Oh, it was to me. I was an inconsolable, angry youth who hated the world, turned away from religion. Nice young Jewish boy from Long Island, had the temple and the rabbis, and, did the bar mitzvah and had all the friends and the trappings and the circles of influence. Once my father died, my mother was inconsolable. My older brother, try as he might, was away at college. My younger brother at 13 was insulated in some way, shape, or form. And here I am thrust into, reviewing the merger and acquisitions and the venture capital and the mortgage repayments and the life insurance policies with an inconsolable mother who had just lost the love of her life. I was angry at the world. I took on, way too much responsibility and drove too fast, worked too hard, and went to the dark side for quite a while. Being a child of Star Wars, it was easy to see that there was the trappings of being, learning how to smoke and driving fast and getting in trouble because it brought you attention, right? And I owe a debt of gratitude to one particular teacher, and then the guidance counselors, as they call them here in the US, at my high school, who saw a troubled youth that never got in trouble before slipping away. And they did what they were paid to do. They interceded, and they said, hey, we have some suggestions to make. We need to get you out of this environment and maybe direct some of that anger and attention towards a vocation. And so I know we talked a little bit about what my vocation is and what my education was, but I was blessed that they gave me an opportunity to attend the first curriculum-based technical college for high school students in the world of culinary arts. And so I got to focus my attention into a passion where I learned how to cook. I mean, growing up Jewish and Sicilian, you're cooking all the time, but really honing that attention and that anger and I harbored a lot of ill will towards people because I looked at them as, you have a father and I don't, you have these things and I don't. And so I think it was the kitchen that gave me my first inflection point where I saw I could go in a different direction. And so it was there where I learned how to begin to stabilize who I am as a person.
Yeah, that is really quite profound and also really helpful that you understand now, looking back, what was going on for you. And often at the time, we don't understand what's going on for us. I'm interested in, you've had a lot of experiences already at that stage, having had a great run up to that moment of 14 to 16 period. But in your whole of your life, what's been your happiest, proudest moment, and what's been your darkest moment? And what have you learned from both of those, if you haven't already mentioned them?
Yeah, the darkest we've talked about, there's nothing darker than the loss of a parent at a young age, aside from maybe the loss of a child. And thank God I've never experienced that. So we'll leave the darkness alone. In professional life, there's lots of dark times, right? You shared in some of your other conversations about being cheated. Well, in business, you have two choices. You can go in with an air of naivete and recognize that your professionalism might be taken advantage of, or your naivete might be. And I'm no different. I have had terrible business partners in my past. I have had opportunities of financial ruin presented to me. I have gotten to the precipice with business partners and recognized that this is not the path I want to go down, and learned from them. I think it's BC Forbes, the impetus for the Forbes publishing empire, who said, it's often better to be occasionally cheated than perpetually suspicious. And so I became perpetually cautious. Some of the proudest moments for me personally is what every coach and consultant and introvert turned extrovert wants: recognition, of course. We want to be recognized for the things that we do well, not so much so as I need the applause of the crowd, right? I used to think I did, but quiet recognition. Everybody wants a pat on the back. I was no different. I think what I learned, though, is that I didn't need to live in the recognition. I just needed to acquire it, recognize it for what it is, be appreciative of it, and then move on with continuing to be who I am versus living in title. I think I have lots of milestones in my professional career in lots of different industries that anyone would be honored to have one of them. And I've accumulated quite a few. I think the challenge for someone like myself is that I lived in the accomplishment as sort of a shield. This is who I am. I'm Dan, the CEO. I'm Dan, the executive chef. I'm Dan, the #1 salesman in the world for a major automotive company, or I'm the rookie of the year for a major real estate empire. And instead, I should have just recognized I think you said rule 6.
Yeah, that's right. Don't take yourself too damn seriously. Yeah.
I didn't do that for probably 30
No.
years of my life. I didn't
Yeah.
do that. And so I've learned, if we're talking about proud moments in life, I think I've learned in the last 20 some odd years, rule 6 needs to apply more often.
Yeah, that's a lovely one. And the other thing I was interested in from all your experiences is a bit of advice, if you could go back to the future and give yourself a bit of sound advice at that age of 14 to 16, which was so turbulent for you, knowing what you know now with all the wisdom, and you've read widely and you've been involved with Mind Valley and all these kind of organizations, and probably gone out into the desert with Burning Man and done weird things and stuck on your head. And like me doing my ayahuasca in Peru later in May, you've probably had all these different experiences. But what is a bit of advice you'd give to a young man today, which you wish you'd given to yourself? Like, don't worry about this, but do focus on that. What would have been relevant for you, Dan?
Thank you. No Burning Man yet. No Burning Man. I've been invited. I was supposed to spend my 50th there, but lots of other introspective journeys. Did I say I was a chef? And there was some, there was some the things. Okay. Number one, stay healthy. I think my mother used to say her greatest regret was not having an autopsy, just so that we definitively knew exactly genetically, was there something there? But that was years ago. And so with modern technology and advancements in science and my willingness to see cardiologists and do stress tests and whatever, maintaining good heart health, at least I know, is going to give me the peace of mind of knowing. Because to go backwards to that 16-year-old child, at 17 to maybe 26, I was on a path to hurry up and die. I was not going to make it to 44. I am a clone genetically of my father. I'm the closest one. I was following in the same trappings and pathways. And so I think if I could give advice to a young 14 or 16-year-old, aside from rule 6, don't take yourself too seriously, it would absolutely work on health. And that includes food. And we'll talk a little bit about it, but there's a line that sticks with me. I don't remember who said it, but it goes like this: food is medicine now, or medicine becomes food later.
Yes, that is so good. Dan, I mean, great advice. And also you've tapped into something which I'm fascinated by and passionate by, and my wife might even say obsessive by. In my dyslexia, as you know, my reading is listening to audiobooks, and I listened to about 20 on the topic of the microbiome, health, well-being, what you eat, what you shouldn't eat. A couple of books I've enjoyed recently: Food, What the Fuck Should I Eat? Or WTF Should I Eat? By Dr. Mark Hyman, which is a really good read, or a good listen, because he's a good speaker. And the other one is Spoon-Fed, by Professor Tim Spector. And Tim, it's quite a current one. I think it's only about a year old. And he's saying a lot of the things that we thought were true are now myths, but they've carried on with the myths and the danger of the food industry. And so, and all the things about inflammatory lifestyles and food that is inflammatory to you, and the importance of the microbiome. And Tim's got this connection with Zoe, which is this organization which takes sample of your gut microbiome and then tells you what for Dan is good for Dan, because there isn't an average. We're not all the same, as we know, with Inuits eating blubber and guys in the forest eating nuts and berries. We're all different, and we need to do the right thing for the right gut so that our health span matches our lifespan. Because in America and in the UK and many other countries, we all there's far too many people, a very high proportion, for the last 16 years of their life, they have 1 or 2 critical illnesses which will kill them. And I'm determined that that isn't me. And having seen, as you know, my brother die of metastatic cancer, I want to minimize that. That's why I do the intermittent fasting and various things like that. But you've touched on something very interesting, Dan. Any thoughts that come up from what I've just said?
Truth, you speak it. I spent many years understanding evidence-based eating after decades of carving, roasting, braising, grilling, barbecuing every little creature known to man, I made a conscious decision to try something for my wife. We said, let's try SOS for 30 days, no salt, no oil, no sugar, and let's see what happens. And I can tell you the effects in the first 30 days for a broken, physically broken individual like myself was exactly what you just discussed, Jonathan. The lack of inflammation for the first time in my life was so rampant. I literally decreased hip pain and knee pain and swelling, and it was amazing what happens when we remove sugars. And so SOS, and then we moved into plant-based, and we were experimenting during a phase of plant-based eating, and we went full vegan for a year and a half.
Me too.
And then we went, then we started adding different proteins and adding fish back into our diet. I still have not, it's probably been 7 years. I can honestly tell you, I haven't ordered beef in a restaurant in 7 years. I rarely ever, eat it at home. But there are other, proteins, and we do balance, everything is about balance. I think what you said comes true for someone who loved food. There are people that eat to live and there are people that live to eat, right? I looked at food as there are no bad foods, simply inappropriate amounts. And that is true right up until you're about 30. Because once you're past 30, there are bad foods. There are foods that should never cross your lips again.
Yeah, and this is where, having had, whether it be people from the Coca-Cola company or people from big food processing companies, I do give them a mildly hard time, because I go, look, we know sugar is not good for us. Why are we cramming so much into these carbonated drinks?
Right.
Oh, but it's part of a balanced diet and it's choice. No, we're all addicts of sugar, and you're just feeding the addicts more sugar. How can we stop doing this? And also the ultra high processed foods that people have are not good for us. There is not good for it. So I'm now finding that I'm in such better shape and health and well-being through eating whole foods and lots of vegetables. And like you, I went through a vegan phase for about a year and a half, but then brought back in certain things. And that's why I found Spoon Fed by Tim Spector so interesting, about some of the problems with fish because of, various things like, the various things that grow on fish, and then you have to put the antibiotics in there and kill off the sea slugs and stuff that stick to them. And so a small amount of protein, chicken and a little bit of fish and a little bit of grass-fed beef rather than corn-fed beef, and then organic. Everything I try and have is organic now. I think it's a whole very interesting area. Thank you for that, Dan. Let's just trip around the Inspiring Leadership Compass with your experiences, beginning with MQ, the true north of the needle. Your values and beliefs from your experiences and your upbringing. What are your top 3 that you found have served you well as your values and principles you live by and you work by?
Thank you. First is authenticity, which comes from a foundation of truthfulness. My father was, active participant in his 3 boys for as long as he was alive, and had imparted certain nuggets of wisdom that to this day stick with each of us. For me, being the middle son, my father said, "Don't lie." I, of course, said, "Why?" And he gave a very childlike answer to a child, which has stuck with me. And he said, when I said why to his statement of "don't lie," he said, "Because they're just too hard to keep track of." And it just made sense. And so being authentic and being, someone who tells the truth, or doesn't speak about something they don't know about, is important to me. And so I'm okay now. For many years I wasn't, but I'm okay now saying I don't know something, or I want to learn more. And we'll talk a little bit about Strength Finder assessment and input and knowledge, how I'm starved for knowledge and input, which is why I gravitate towards so many different industries, and I just like a sponge. So I'm constantly in a state of learning. People don't care, if you're not good at something, but they do care if you're inauthentic. It took a long time for me to balance confidence against cockiness, or assertiveness against arrogance. And for decades, I was telling myself that I was just simply confident. And it turns out it was cocky and arrogance as a defense mechanism, where now it's just, how do we invite humility into our life? And so I live by those principles of authenticity and honesty and humility as much as possible. Remember, YCDB, you can do better. It's a mirror-facing mantra. It's the whisper in my ear that my wife told me when she saw me living up here and she saw me being inauthentic, or she saw me embellishing in conversation in public in circles where I would hold court. And she would whisper, you can do better. You didn't have to go that extra. You didn't have to layer on or gild the lily, in a dialogue just to impress people, which we all do.
Yeah.
And I took that to heart and turned it into a philosophy, which turned into a company. So I honor a Fab.
I think your wife Fab is spot on, and my wife Lee is often spot on with me, where she will catch me just over-indexing certain things. I just ask, why do you need to do that? And I remember vividly, had a sales meeting with a partner in one of the big firms, KPMG or something like that. And I chatted with them, made a good connection. It was good to see them again. We'd met before. And then I oversold. I just like pushed it too hard. That wasn't what he wanted. And I could see him visibly back away. And just like, you can't overdo things, just over-index it. And rather than be really interested with the person, you're pushing too much of your own agenda. And I did that occasion, and the guy backed off, never bought from me, never interacted again. And I remember it vividly. It stays with me. So
my brother had just on one note, my brother gave me an expression. My brother's a phenomenal human being, but also an extremely talented salesman, and in his own right. And I'm going to make a recommendation to get him on here because of his life journey and the areas where top salesman in the world and consultant and fascinating human being. And my older brother told me, stop selling past the close, Ziegler. You're selling past the close. And that was something I was famous for. This is selling past what the customer was already, I'd already won you over. There was no need.
Yeah.
And so I catch myself, and we talked before our call. I said, rein me in, Jonathan, so that I don't sell past the question or sell past.
Well, it's really good. And there's some need in us to, that American friend of mine in the military said, first I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you what I told you. And whoa, too much. But it can be too much of a sort of mantra, and it's almost an insecurity that we feel we have to sell ourselves rather than be really interested in them so they buy us. And I do remember this misguided idea that salesmen have, that it's all about meetings. That famous conversation between two salesmen. Salesman A says to B, I've had some great meetings today. And the other guy says, yeah, I didn't sell anything either. That's like, it's just so lovely. I love some of the sayings that come from it. Let's go from MQ and I'd be interested to have a chat with your brother, to PQ. Purpose question. What gives your life meaning and purpose, Dan? Why have you done what you've done, but now why are you doing what you're doing? That sense of purpose every day in what you do.
Sure. Great question. Ideation, first and foremost, it's my number one strength, and it's the thing that I love the most, to help people flourish and grow and develop and nurture ideas. The other side of YCDB is you can dream bigger, right? And it's about fostering that spark, of creativity. And so getting down and dirty into what ideation really means and how to build a concept and idea that someone may shudder away as improbable or impossible. I'm there to nurture those ideas. Execution is a different skill set. Having command and control over your employees is a skill set. Ideation is something that some of us are born with and naturally flourish and develop. I happen to be a master ideator, and ideas come, hourly sometimes. And so I love to share what that skill set looks like in practical sense and from a strategic perspective with people in a particular industry and area. I'm also, a purpose of mine is collaborative approach. I used to believe for a very long time, like many of us, that it was about competition. This is the day after the Super Bowl here in the US, And of course, it was a wonderful competition. But in the end, after it's over, it's about cooperation and a collaborative approach to bring that, to bring that presentation, all the moving parts that went into it. I studied collaboration from a very different perspective. Natural disaster. I spent some time in disaster mitigation and disaster preparedness. And pre-pandemic, I mean, this is 10, 15 years ago. And it's amazing that those people that believe competition is the answer have rarely been involved in a hurricane or a fire or a flood or a tornado where you're surrounded by your neighbors. I've got propane and a barbecue. You've got steaks and no electricity or power. I've got a tree across my property. You've got a chainsaw. We're both struggling. We're neighbors. We need to collaborate and cooperate in order to survive until help arrives. And that could be weeks in some areas. And so having an influence and understanding what the Red Cross is doing and what disaster preparedness companies do, I felt that there's got to be a way to bring collaborative approach and the spirit of cooperation into corporations, right? It's not operations versus sales. It's not the front of the house versus the back of the house. There's a tribal culture, there's a team dynamic. And so part of my purpose is really about understanding how do we bridge and build a tribe where everybody together is going in the same direction? How do we elevate ourselves from a cooperative perspective?
No, it's a lovely approach, and it's always going to win. Collaboration over competition. And that's the essence of building great teams, because I'm reading Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, which is about people who are givers and people who are takers, and then those who want equality between a bit of give and a bit of take. It's a very interesting book. I haven't quite finished it yet, so I'm drawing some things. But this point about, in some situations when it's very dog eat dog, one person can do well on their own as a taker, but often you need people to collaborate and give if a whole team's going to succeed or a nation's going to succeed. And that's perhaps where many of the Western countries are getting it very badly wrong at the moment. And it's all about what's in it for me. Talking about sort of disasters and things, that also affects people's health and well-being and all that goes on. And that's my next topic, health and well-being, health quotient. With that experience you had where you were in a wheelchair, your father at 44, sadly dying with that sudden cardiac arrest, you being very aware of that, you being growing up in that Jewish and sort of Sicilian upbringing about great food. Of course, if we just go for the Sicilian side and the blue zones, of course, they're famed, Sicily famed, and Corsica and Sardinia with some of the longest living people. So it's very interesting, this whole area of epigenetics, and that you are not necessarily defined by your genes. You can tweak those little bits above the genes by your lifestyle choices and what you eat, how you exercise, how you take stress out of your life and inflammation, and how you link with families and friends, and really look after the whole of yourself in everything. So I find that very interesting. What 2 tips would you give on physical health and on mental health that have that served you?
Thank you. I'll tie it up in one, and it's adopt a dog. preferably a Labrador or other form of retriever that commands, demands, and requires health and exercise. And so I was blessed for my 40th birthday to be the recipient of a 7-month-old purebred American Labrador. The individual who previously had them could no longer keep him. And so I found myself with a dog that I was somewhat familiar with, but I see you didn't realize that in order to give him the life he deserved, I had to abide by his rules. And fish swim, birds fly, dogs walk, and they walk in a pack, and they want an alpha, and they want to know, are they safe? Who controls the food? And who's my pack leader? And I read Cesar Millan's books and took lots of other advice from people. And I said, I'm going to do something different. I had a goofy Labrador as a kid, and she was fat, and she only went out in the backyard to do her business and came back in the house. And that was not exercise. And so I made a conscious effort. This dog needs to be walked, so he's well adjusted and calm in the home. And we did 3 times a day, 3 walks a day, 3, 4, 5,000 steps per walk. And I found myself, feeling better. My hip felt better. My body felt better. I looked better. I had more stamina. he got, yeah, he's 13 and a half years old now. And so I know that that has had an impact on him. So first, number one rule for health, wellness, you also added de-stress. Nothing says you've had a bad day and it'll be okay, like the look of a Labrador retriever who knows nothing from stress and anxiety and self-reflection and doubt and pity. They just look at you with unconditional love. And it's wonderful to have that balance to come home to. I suffer from anxiety. I suffer from those things. And so just like everybody else who's a top performer, you always have self-doubt. You mentioned Mind Valley. I got to meet Marissa Peer, who's a wonderful, wonderful coach in her own right. And I got to study and understand what the I am enough movement is for mental health. And then, figuring out that I am enough, right here, right now, at this moment in time, I don't need to do much more.
It's a lovely connection between us. I think we mentioned it before, but when Lee and I got married 7 years ago, this April, we had as guests at the wedding Marissa Peer and her husband John, and she did a bit of hypnosis on Harriet, my daughter. But this was in the early days, 7 years ago, before she became really famous. Yeah, and she was great fun, and John also with his Burning Man passions for going to those events. But
I didn't know that. I didn't know John.
Yeah, that's quite fun. No, I am enough. Exactly as you are is a really important one. But it's lovely because I'm looking at Archie there, who's by my door, wanting to go out because there's a friend visiting my wife who's got a little dog who he's desperately in love with, and we're just trying to decide at the moment. He's coming up to 2 this year, and he's a working cocker and a really beautifully bred cocker spaniel. And yeah, he gets his 2 walks a day. And we have one of these contraptions which has it's a plastic stick which propels a ball miles, and he will run after it and run up all day long. He will not give up all day long. I think they say Labradors are born half trained and Cocker Spaniels die half trained. So perhaps I should, because he likes the pack syndrome, maybe we're thinking we should get another dog as company for him. I've often wondered about a mate for him. But then you have 3 times the crisis in the house with mud and muck and stuff rather than just twice. But we'll see. What do you reckon about getting a second dog?
Oh, without a doubt. If I could go over and do it again, we had 2 cats in the house, 2 senior cats when we got Flynn. And so I thought it was going to be enough of a tumultuous experience, and it was. They never bonded, unfortunately. And they were the kings, and he was, when he got to 80, 90 pounds, he still couldn't get near them. All he wanted to do was kiss them and lick them and play with them. And all they wanted to do was eviscerate and kill him.
Yeah.
So it was a horrible experience for the cats for the 5 years that they all lived together. But we would have gotten 2 dogs. Absolutely.
No,
because they are pack animals and they do love that camaraderie. And there's so many, adoptable dogs, whether they're senior dogs or whether they're, mutts, and they all deserve a home. I'm a big proponent of adopt, not shop. And so there's so many. Although you and I both have just discussed our purebreds, I got mine, because we were helping out a military family who needed to go back into service. And so the idea that giving him a mate would be a wonderful thing for you to discuss, but your own personal housing situation has to take paramount.
You're right. And in fact, my brother, much to our surprise, we didn't talk to each other at the time, and he lives 40 minutes away. He'd also got a Cocker Spaniel at about a week difference from me. We didn't know about this. I think a friend of them gave them a young puppy, and she's now a bitch. And so we're hoping at some stage to mate the 2 of them and maybe keep one of the daughters to be company for Archie. Going from health quotient to emotional intelligence quotient, emotional and social intelligence. In all the work that you've done in so many different industries with so many successes and also some disasters which you've learned from, what would be your top tip about emotional intelligence?
Common sense is not overrated. It started with kitchen sense for me, which was an understanding of a sense of where people are and health and well-being and behind the line in the kitchen. When you're playing with fire and knives and temperaments and attitudes and the kitchens of New York, you have to have a sense of common sense and understanding. That has followed me in every one of my businesses, where you seem to think it's overrated, but it's not. Really having a pragmatic approach to common sense. Most of the answers are available to us. Um, I would think that that's probably one of the most underrated skill sets.
Yeah, I think common sense is not common practice, as they say, and never assume it. That's a good one. I like that one. CQ is the next one, cultural intelligence quotient. So collective intelligence, but also this idea of diversity, equality, inclusion. What's been your tip as you grew up in Long Island, New York, with that mixture of the Sicilian and the Jewish communities, and then you've met many different people from many different backgrounds. What advice would you give about really understanding difference and accepting it and including people?
I love this question, truly, because I grew up with an understanding. Now, granted, my Sicilian grandfather came to our lives before any of me and my brothers were born, but I am not of Sicilian blood. To me, that never mattered, and I grew up in a family where that didn't matter because I was, taught us about pride, and it brought us into his religion. He was a Catholic, put on a yarmulke and stood up at the bima during our bar mitzvah to read from the Torah with the rabbi and opened up the ark. We had Christmas and Hanukkah parties, and so cultural diversity and an understanding that each one of us can practice our own religions, but our beliefs and what we do in life should be similar, was great as a foundation as a young child. Right, nothing was off limits. But then I really believe it's summed up best by Mark Twain. And if I could read you a quote, it has to do with travel. And so Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudiced bigotry and narrow-mindedness, as many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime.
Brilliant. I love it.
You have to travel. I have been blessed. Fabienne got a job later in her life that she didn't necessarily expect, but gravitated towards, with Delta Airlines. And through her efforts and work at Delta Airlines, she wound up getting awarded non-revenue generating or standby travel. And so we took full advantage of it. Within the first year, we were spending 2 days or 3-day weekends traveling to Paris and Brussels and Nice and Morocco and Monaco and Barcelona and Malaga. And I have to tell you, Jonathan, we live in the greatest country on earth, period. Anybody that says differently just needs to go visit another country. And when you see economic depravity at the level that some of these people are very happy living in, and when you see, the shanty shacks in the road of Jamaica, and you see the souks in Marrakesh, and you see poverty in Istanbul, Turkey, and you see happiness combined with economic depravity, you recognize it's not the money that's going to make us happy. It's our own, it's our own situation, right? We overthink things in this country, as many developed countries do. But I would say travel is the most important thing to add to a broad, well-rounded individual.
You are spot on, Dan. And once again, it's this curiosity. Why is it that America, with all its wealth, is actually not the happiest country at all as far as happiness? And why is it that people in Mexico who are lower income are happier? There's a whole range of things that lead to happiness. But I love the simple difference between happiness and success. A quote someone said, which is, success is getting what you want. Happiness is wanting what you already have. And I think there's this drive for more and more material stuff, which, as you know, in your brand and marketing days, we have to be careful that we don't, I've got one Apple Watch. That's fine. That's all I need. Why do I need 3 more watches? This one does the job, and enough of this. But almost we're made to feel, and the whole marketing machine makes us feel that we will be happy when I get this or that product. And I think we just have to manage that carefully. Quick fire questions just on resilience. What would be your tip about coping with life and the changes that happen to you? What's your tip on resilience against challenges and perhaps what do they call obstacles?
It's never as bad as you think it is. 99% of the story that you tell yourself is a lie and not true. It's never going to work out that way. So stop fooling yourself. I think Brene Brown talks about this in one of her conversations about, we tell ourselves these stories and they never turn out as bad as they are. Aside from a physical modality, everything else is fixable. Even physical modalities are fixable, as evidenced by me. But for the most part, as long as it's not a medical challenge, you can dream bigger. You can look to the future with a level of positivity. Yesterday is in the past for a reason, right? And I'm always a futurist. I'm always looking forward with a positive attitude because I've had the perspective of what a really shitty existence can look like. And I lived and wallowed in self-pity and anger and woe is me for as long as anyone should. And it didn't serve me. And so it's really about asking for help and understanding it.
Yeah, that's a really good one, Dan. And next one, your favorite one, is brand quotient, the penultimate one of the trip around the inspiring leadership compass of what makes people high performers. What have you learned from 360 and feedback? You've been on many of these courses. You probably, as a coach, you've done 360 with others. But what have you learned about yourself through 360, and what have you done to continue to grow and learn?
I've learned that to trust in myself. As long as I stay true to the tenets of humility and authenticity, and I'm not looking to impress for the sake of impressing someone, right? I stay true to myself, and that ideation for me rules the day. Formulating and coming up with ideas and then sharing them with others and letting them run with it has been part of my personal brand. I grew up with a team dynamic going all the way back to the earliest days of my restaurant, where we ironed a T in the back of our chef's jacket to represent teamwork, to the understanding that, I didn't play, as we discussed earlier, on many sports teams, but I do understand and appreciate sport. And they're all about, a team dynamic versus individual accomplishment. And I think it's keeping that in the forefront of our minds that drives me today. How do I become? I may be a temporary member of your team. I may come in to add a level of perspective, ideation, strategy, tactics, course correction. I may come in and teach you how to coach up or coach out individuals, which we'll talk about. But I'm still part of the team, and I can assimilate very quickly.
That's very good. And then legacy. What would you like your legacy to be in the work you do? The difference that you leave behind, the stewardship, leaving things better than you found it. And what about with Fabian and your two children that you've inherited?
I love that word. The only two children I will have, and I'm blessed. And it's funny how that world works, right? I would have had a boy and a girl had I been blessed with my own, but I wound up with a beautiful boy and a beautiful girl that were 8 and 10 when I came into the relationship. And just to digress a bit, I would have named one after my father, Jerome, and I wound up with a Jeremy. I would have named one after my grandfather, Salvatore. I wound up with a Sarah. And so Fate is a funny way of giving us exactly what we didn't know we needed at the time. And so get a little emotional there. Legacy is important. I would like some grandchildren to impart some wisdom personally. I keep getting grandpuppies. Both my children keep adopting dogs. And so we get to see them a lot, but I can't impart the knowledge and wisdom of what every old Jewish grandpa wants to do to their grandchildren. And so I hope over the next few years, maybe sooner, that there's some grandkids for me to leave a legacy to. Professionally in work, I never worried about legacy in work. I have lots of benchmarks and accolades and press clippings. They impressed me and they were important to me. I didn't really care what the world thought of me. But now I think it's just, leaving a mark. I'm involved in the development of products and services. And so whether it's somehow being a part of something that leaves a lasting legacy, we make an impact in the green movement with micromobility, or I'm involved in a new DeFi cryptocurrency platform that changes the way banking works, or I'm involved in an automotive project that moves, sustainability forward. Sure, that's a legacy, but not a solo endeavor. I think I'd be much more proud looking back from the next world if I were to look back and say that I was part of something bigger, not as a solo accomplisher, but as a team.
Yeah, and you talked about teams. I'm interested in your experience of teams. When you've come across a team that's toxic, how have you made it high performing? What's your top tip on turning around if there's an individual in there who's toxic, or the whole team's gone toxic? What have you done to help them turn it round?
It's a good question. Every team will have those tumultuous challenges. I've been involved in lots of them. So first and foremost, I'm a big proponent of strength-based assessment and understanding everyone's strengths. Sometimes the toxicity comes from an unknown divergence from an individual's strength that's not being identified, recognized, or appreciated. And so first identifying what your team is good at, and I use Gallup as a strength finder platform. I use strength-based assessment in my coaching practice so that we can start with a level set. What is everyone good at on an individual basis? And then we see, is everyone in the right area? But if all that fails and we still wind up with a toxic individual, and we've done our level best to coach them up through the ranks and provide them the necessary assistance, and we've exhausted human resources and stern warnings and then coaching, really coaching them personally and professionally, well, do them the favor, not just yourself, do them the favor of coaching them out and release them from the burden of being involved in something that obviously is toxic to them, and then they're manifesting that toxicity to the team. And so I'm a big proponent of firing people. Hell, I've fired clients when there's been a toxic client relationship and we're just not working together. I have fired them from me because it's what's in my best interest, and in the end, it's in their best interest.
Yeah.
And so I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it's a really good point you make, and as one of my CEOs said, I help them find their happiness elsewhere because we've tried our best here and it's just not working. And time and again, when that person moves on, the whole of the team lifts its game. It's almost like it's not a psychologically safe environment. But when they make the move and that person's gone, everything changes for everyone. And that person often performs better somewhere else. And in some cases they don't. They're a serial white-collar psychopath, or what I call the dark triad of the narcissist plus the psychopath plus the Machiavellian traits. And they will always be little evil bastards, as my old Sergeant Major would say. And there's a special place in hell reserved for them. Your favorite book, your top favorite book. Which book have you read recently that you think's well worth recommending to everybody who's listening? And what was it that was so good about it, Dan?
Thank you. By the way, in your previous comment, I see you've known some of my past business partners. Let's keep us a triad. Books. I, like you, not because of dyslexia, but simply because of some internal boredom and clock, wasn't a reader. I didn't necessarily pick up the book as a child and say, I love to disappear into the pages. But once I discovered Audible, and it was because of a client, we were working on branding and marketing his books, and we were seeking, reviewing, and interviewing orators or narrators for his book. I discovered Michael Kramer, and Michael Kramer in the Audible system is one of the most well-respected orators. And then I backed into what Michael Kramer was reading on behalf of his clients. I think the guy gets paid like $10,000 to read your book or something. I found Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference.
Yes.
But I didn't read the book. I listened to Michael Kramer, because if you listen to Chris Voss, nothing against the guy, he's one of the best negotiators in the world. I highly recommend the book, and I've integrated a lot of the phraseologies into conflict resolution and discussion, seems like, looks like, sounds like, and so forth. But Michael Kramer, the way he reads the book and the tempo and the tender of his voice and the inflection, and the way he draws you into the book, I was sold. And I'm on there hunting for books that he may have read, so that my absorption of the knowledge and information is both pleasurable and knowledgeable simultaneously. Second to that, I would highly recommend.
By the way, send me the list of the books he's read, because I'm the same. I like to listen to someone who's read them well. And I loved Never Split the Difference by Chris. There
are definitely people that don't take their own advice. Publishers will tell you, if you don't have the gift of oration, right, and understand tempo and tender, and really been schooled and trained with the proper microphone, don't read your own stuff. Pay someone to read it. That's their job. That's not your strength. Your strength was maybe imparting the knowledge. Find someone else's strength. and I have lost and jettisoned myself from books. There's a couple others. Anything with the title Unfuckwithable gravitate towards me, because I have felt that since I was 16 years old. And so any book, I think Lindsay Manfredi has one, how to be unfuckwithable. It's really just about dropping the shield of the things that we put in front of us to defend ourselves from things that'll hurt us, and just be ourselves, but also have this understanding of who we are.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan. And we're at the final stage now, which is the 2-minute top leadership tip. And then when you've said that, we'll wrap up. But Dan, would you just briefly, as you did at the beginning, introduce yourself, say who you are and the work you do, and then give us your 2-minute leadership top tip. Over to you.
Hi, again, my name is Dan Ziegler, and I'm the CEO and founder of YCDB. It's a coaching platform and a consulting service, fractured into 2 sections. You can do better and you can dream bigger. Really about the understanding of what ideation and strategy and tactics can do for you in business. Think of me more of a tactical sparring partner for your business before the main event. The birth of a brand, the relaunch of a restaurant, the understanding of a service. And my top tip is twofold. One of them is how to provide a level of care and genuinely displaying caring and concern when you require a customer to take money out of their pocket for your product or service is an underrated skill. And so I'll say it again, genuinely display care and concern. And it's time and time again that we fail to measure up to the expectations of our customers, who all they want to do is buy our product and service. And my second top tip is important. Anyone that has an individual in your organization that is public facing, that is under the age of 40, please root out the phrase "no problem." It is being used ad nauseum, and it is driving guys like me crazy. No problem is not the answer to, may I have a refill of root beer, please? May I have some extra towels for my room? May I, can you show me where the bathroom is? Can I get this in a larger size? No problem is not the answer. With pleasure, my pleasure, with pleasure, thank you, of course, but not no problem, because it really is a problem and it's become an endemic, and I see it in my coaching practice. And so those are my top 2 tips.
Hakuna Matata, as they say in Kenya. But look, great tips. Thank you, Dan. And it's been lovely having you on the Inspiring Leadership series. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and I'm sure you'll continue to be a great asset to many people who are fortunate to work with you.
Thank you.